If you've been wondering why buying a car suddenly feels impossible, this is the reason. We're not talking about small price increases or minor financing changes. We're talking about a complete shift in how Americans are paying for vehicles and what that says about where the market is headed. The numbers coming out of Edmunds aren't just surprising, they're borderline unbelievable, and they reveal how deeply affordability has been stretched for everyday buyers. One of the most jaw-dropping revelations is the explosion in record-high monthly car payments. According to Edmunds data, more than 1 in 5 new car buyers in Q4 2025 are now signing up for monthly payments of $1,000 or more. Let that sink in for a moment. $1,000 every single month. Not for rent, not for a mortgage, but just for a car. This isn't limited to luxury vehicles either. Many of these payments are tied to mainstream SUVs, trucks, and family vehicles that used to be considered reasonably priced. What was once an extreme outlier has now become shockingly common, signaling that the definition of normal car ownership has completely changed. So how did we get here? The answer lies in soaring vehicle costs combined with much more expensive financing. New car prices have climbed steadily over the last few years, and interest rates have added fuel to the fire. Even buyers with solid credit are facing rates that dramatically inflate monthly payments. To make the numbers work, many consumers are stretching loan terms to 6, 7, or even 8 years, locking themselves into long-term debt just to drive something new off the lot. Others are putting less money down, rolling negative equity into new loans, or accepting payments that eat up a massive portion of their monthly income. The result is a generation of buyers paying more than ever for cars that haven't fundamentally changed in value. This has triggered what can only be described as an affordability crisis in the new car market. For average income buyers, the math simply doesn't add up anymore. Wages haven't risen fast enough to keep pace with vehicle prices and financing costs, and many shoppers are realizing that new cars are no longer within reach. As a result, a growing number of people are abandoning the new car market altogether and turning to used vehicles, hoping to find relief. But even that escape route isn't as safe as it once was. The used car market, which traditionally offered a more affordable alternative, is now facing intense pressure of its own. Inventory remains limited, prices are still elevated compared to pre-pandemic levels, and demand remains strong from buyers priced out of new cars. This has pushed used car payments higher than many people ever expected. In some cases, buyers are shocked to find themselves paying near new car monthly payments for vehicles that are several years old with tens of thousands of miles on them. The idea that used automatically means affordable is no longer guaranteed, and for many consumers, the difference between new and used has narrowed uncomfortably. What makes all of this even more alarming is what Edmunds' data suggests about the broader direction of the car market. These trends aren't isolated spikes or temporary distortions. They point to a structural shift in how vehicles are priced, financed, and consumed. The market is quietly moving toward higher monthly obligations, longer debt cycles, and greater financial strain on buyers. For automakers and lenders, this may look sustainable in the short term, but for consumers, it raises serious questions about long-term affordability, financial flexibility, and the true cost of car ownership. Edmunds' findings force us to confront a hard truth. The traditional car buying model is breaking down for the average buyer. What used to be a manageable expense has turned into a major financial commitment that rivals housing costs for some households. And as more people accept these high payments as normal, the market continues to drift further away from affordability, setting the stage for even bigger disruptions ahead if something doesn't change. And this is where the situation becomes even more unsettling, because the data doesn't just reflect what buyers are choosing, it reflects what they're being forced into. Many consumers aren't paying $1,000 a month because they want to. They're doing it because the alternatives are disappearing. Cheaper trims are harder to find, incentives are weaker than they used to be, and dealer pricing strategies often push buyers toward higher margin models. When you combine that with higher interest rates, even a modestly priced vehicle can balloon into a payment that feels absurd just a few years ago. What's especially concerning is how normalized these extreme payments are becoming. Edmunds' data shows that buyers are increasingly comfortable signing contracts that stretch well beyond traditional loan lengths, sometimes approaching nearly a decade of payments. That means people are still paying for vehicles long after the warranty expires, long after maintenance costs increase, and sometimes even after the car has lost a significant portion of its value. This creates a cycle where negative equity becomes unavoidable, trapping buyers in a loop where each new purchase starts with financial baggage from the last one. At the same time, the psychological shift in consumer behavior is impossible to ignore. Instead of asking, how much does this car cost? Buyers are now conditioned to ask, what's the monthly payment? That single change has quietly reshaped the entire market. By focusing on monthly numbers rather than total cost, buyers are more likely to accept higher prices, longer loans, and more interest over time. EDMUNDS' data makes it clear that this mindset has accelerated the affordability problem, allowing vehicle prices to climb while masking the true financial impact. Dealerships and lenders have adapted quickly to this new reality, structuring deals that make high payments feel unavoidable but manageable in the moment. Add-ons, extended warranties, protection packages, and rolled-in fees further inflate the loan while keeping the payment within a psychologically acceptable range. On paper, the deal works, but over the life of the loan, buyers are paying tens of thousands more than they realize. EDMUNDS' insights reveal that this isn't an exception, it's becoming the standard. Even more alarming is what this means for younger buyers and first-time car shoppers. Entering the market today often means starting with historically high payments and debt levels, leaving little room for financial recovery if circumstances change. A job loss, a medical expense, or a shift in interest rates can quickly turn a manageable payment into a financial crisis. The data suggests that the car market is quietly transferring more risk onto consumers while maintaining record profits for manufacturers and lenders. And as affordability continues to erode, the ripple effects extend beyond individual buyers. Fewer people upgrading vehicles means slower turnover, tighter inventory, and sustained high prices across both new and used markets. EDMUNDS' data points to a system that's feeding on itself, where high prices create high payments. High payments reduce accessibility, and reduced accessibility pushes the entire market further out of balance. This imbalance is starting to reshape how people think about car ownership itself. For decades, owning a car represented independence, stability, and upward mobility. Now, EDMUNDS' data suggests that for many households, a car has become a financial liability that demands constant sacrifice. Buyers are cutting back on savings, delaying major life decisions, and reallocating household budgets just to keep up with vehicle payments. What was once a practical purchase has turned into a long-term financial obligation that competes with rent, groceries, and healthcare. Another overlooked consequence is how this environment disproportionately affects middle and lower income buyers. While higher income consumers may absorb a $1,000 payment without immediate stress, average earners feel the pressure immediately. EDMUNDS' numbers highlight a widening gap where car ownership increasingly favors those with strong incomes or existing equity, while everyone else is pushed toward riskier financing structures. This divide raises serious questions about mobility access and fairness in a market that once catered to a broad range of buyers. What's also striking is how automakers have quietly adjusted their strategies in response to these trends. Entry-level models have been trimmed, discontinued, or repositioned at higher price points, leaving fewer genuinely affordable options on the market. At the same time, manufacturers are heavily promoting larger vehicles, premium trims, and tech-heavy packages that justify higher prices but further strain affordability. EDMUNDS' data doesn't just reflect consumer choices, it reveals how the industry itself is steering buyers toward higher cost outcomes. The used market, meanwhile, is absorbing the overflow from this pricing pressure, but it's doing so at a cost. Vehicles that would have once been considered budget-friendly are now commanding prices that feel unjustifiable to many shoppers. EDMUNDS' insights show that limited supply and sustained demand have created a floor under used car prices, preventing the kind of correction buyers are hoping for. As a result, many people find themselves choosing between an expensive new car or an almost as expensive used one, neither of which feels like a good option. And then there's the long-term risk to the market itself. When payments rise faster than incomes for too long, something eventually gives. EDMUNDS' data hints at a potential tipping point where delinquency rates, loan defaults, or sudden demand drops could disrupt the entire system. If buyers begin to reject these high payments en masse, manufacturers and lenders may be forced to rethink pricing, incentives, and financing structures in ways the industry hasn't seen in years. What makes this moment especially critical is that the shock isn't isn't coming from speculation or opinion. It's coming straight from hard data. Edmunds is simply holding up a mirror to the car market and showing what's already happening beneath the surface. The question now isn't whether the market has changed, but how long consumers can sustain these conditions before the pressure becomes impossible to ignore. As this pressure builds, the behavior of buyers is starting to shift in subtle but important ways. Edmunds' data suggests that more consumers are delaying purchases entirely, choosing to hold on to aging vehicles longer than ever before. Cars that would have been traded in after 4 or 5 years are now being driven well past a decade, not because people want to, but because replacing them has become financially overwhelming. This trend reduces turnover in both new and used markets, tightening supply even further and reinforcing the cycle of high prices. At the same time, there's growing evidence that buyers are compromising on what they actually want just to stay within reach of affordability. Features, safety upgrades, and even reliability expectations are being sacrificed in favor of whatever fits the monthly budget. Edmunds' findings imply that consumers are no longer optimizing for value or longevity, they're optimizing for survival within a broken pricing system. That shift alone speaks volumes about how strained the market has become. Another critical aspect revealed by Edmunds' data is the increasing reliance on credit stretching. Higher down payments are becoming less common, while negative equity rollovers are becoming normalized. Buyers who owe more on their current vehicle than it's worth are rolling that debt into new loans, inflating payments before they even begin. This practice masks affordability problems in the short term, but compounds them in the long run, creating a fragile financial foundation that grows weaker with every purchase cycle. What's particularly troubling is how resilient the system appears on the surface. Sales are still happening, dealerships are still moving inventory, and automakers continue reporting strong revenues. But Edmunds' data reveals that this apparent stability is built on increasingly strained consumers. The market isn't healthy because it's affordable. It's functioning because buyers are absorbing more risk, more debt, and more financial stress than ever before. The broader economic implications can't be ignored either. When households allocate more income toward car payments, less money flows into savings, investments, or local economies. Edmunds' insights suggest that the car market's affordability crisis doesn't stay confined to dealerships. It ripples outward, affecting financial security, consumer confidence, and long-term economic stability. Cars may be essential, but the cost of accessing them is quietly reshaping household finances nationwide. And perhaps the most unsettling takeaway from all of this is how quickly these changes have become normalized. What once would have triggered widespread alarm is now treated as standard market behavior. Edmunds' data forces us to ask whether the industry has simply adjusted to higher payments, or whether consumers have been pushed past a breaking point without realizing it yet. This normalization is what makes Edmunds' data so powerful and so unsettling at the same time. When extreme numbers stop feeling extreme, it signals a deeper problem. A $1,000 monthly payment used to be a red flag, something reserved for luxury cars and high earners. Now it's quietly becoming part of the mainstream conversation, and that shift suggests consumers are being conditioned to accept financial strain as the cost of participation in modern life. Edmunds isn't just reporting numbers, it's documenting a cultural shift in how debt is perceived. Another layer to this story is the growing gap between perception and reality. Many buyers still believe that prices will eventually come down, or that interest rates will magically return to historic lows. But Edmunds' data indicates that even if some correction occurs, the structure of the market has fundamentally changed. Automakers have learned that consumers will tolerate higher payments if they're spread out over time, and lenders have adjusted their products to support that tolerance. This makes a full return to pre-crisis affordability far less likely than many people hope. The rise of technology and feature-heavy vehicles also plays a role in this transformation. Advanced driver assistance systems, massive infotainment screens, and electrification are often cited as justifications for higher prices. While these features may add value on paper, Edmunds' data shows that buyers are paying disproportionately more for them through financing. The cost of innovation is being passed directly to consumers, and it's being financed over longer periods, magnifying its impact on monthly payments. There's also a behavioral feedback loop forming. As high payments become common, consumers begin to anchor their expectations around them. A $700 or $800 payment may suddenly feel reasonable compared to a 4-digit alternative, even though it would have been unthinkable just a few years ago. Edmunds' insights suggest that this anchoring effect is quietly resetting the baseline for what people consider affordable, lowering resistance to rising costs across the board. Meanwhile, those who opt out of the market entirely face their own challenges. Public transportation alternatives incentives remain limited in many regions, and repair costs for aging vehicles continue to rise. EDMUNDS' data highlights a reality where many consumers feel trapped between two bad options. Take on crushing debt or keep driving a vehicle that's increasingly expensive to maintain. Neither choice represents a healthy or sustainable market outcome. All of this points to a car market that is functioning, but not thriving in the way it once did. EDMUNDS' data reveals a system stretched thin, supported by consumer resilience rather than genuine affordability. And as long as this tension remains unresolved, the risk of sudden disruption grows. Not because people don't need cars, but because the cost of owning one is drifting further away from what most households can realistically sustain. As that risk continues to build, the conversation around responsibility becomes impossible to ignore. EDMUNDS' data implicitly raises the question of who is bearing the burden of this market shift. Is it consumers who are signing longer and riskier loans just to stay mobile? Is it lenders who are extending credit deeper into uncertain territory? Or is it automakers who continue pushing higher priced vehicles while reducing affordable entry points? The reality is that the strain is being passed downward, landing squarely on buyers who have the least flexibility. What's particularly revealing is how resilient demand appears despite worsening affordability. EDMUNDS' numbers show that people still need cars, especially in regions where alternatives simply don't exist. That necessity creates a captive audience, one that absorbs higher costs not out of desire, but out of necessity. This dynamic allows prices and payments to climb without immediately collapsing demand, but it also means consumers are increasingly stretched to their limits, leaving little margin for economic shocks. The data also hints at potential generational consequences. Younger buyers entering the market today are starting their financial lives with unprecedented levels of auto debt. EDMUNDS insights suggest that this early burden could delay homeownership, reduce retirement savings, and limit long-term wealth accumulation. Cars, once a stepping stone to independence, may now be acting as a barrier to broader financial stability for an entire generation. At the same time, the role of credit scores and financing approval has become more critical than ever. Small differences in interest rates now translate into massive changes in monthly payments. EDMUNDS' data shows that even buyers with good credit are paying significantly more than they would have in previous years, while those with weaker profiles are often locked out entirely or pushed into extremely unfavorable terms. This further concentrates market access among higher income, lower risk borrowers. Another underappreciated factor is how these trends affect trade-ins. Vehicles that would have once held enough value to offset new purchases are now frequently underwater, especially for buyers who stretched into long loans. EDMUNDS' data suggests that negative equity is becoming a structural feature of the market rather than a temporary issue. This traps consumers in a cycle where every new purchase starts at a disadvantage, compounding financial stress over time. Taken together, these patterns reveal a car market that is no longer aligned with the financial reality of its consumers. EDMUNDS isn't predicting a collapse. It's documenting a slow erosion of affordability that could lead to sudden consequences if conditions shift. And the most striking part is that this transformation is happening in plain sight, backed by data, while much of the public conversation still treats it as a temporary phase rather than a fundamental change. This disconnect between reality and perception is one of the most dangerous elements exposed by EDMUNDS' data. When a market drifts this far from affordability, it doesn't always collapse loudly or suddenly. Instead, it weakens quietly, one stretched loan at a time. Buyers keep signing deals, lenders keep approving them, and manufacturers keep raising prices, all while the underlying foundation grows more fragile. EDMUNDS' numbers suggest we're not watching a bubble inflate rapidly, and we're watching pressure accumulate slowly, which can be even more disruptive when it finally releases. Another important signal hidden in the data is how consumer trust is beginning to erode. As buyers realize they're paying more and getting less financial flexibility in return, frustration builds. EDMUNDS insights hint at growing skepticism toward dealerships, financing structures, and even automakers themselves. When consumers feel trapped rather than served, long-term brand loyalty weakens, and the emotional connection to car ownership starts to fade. The ripple effects also extend into leasing, which was once seen as a more affordable alternative for some buyers. EDMUNDS' data shows that lease payments have climbed as well, driven by higher vehicle prices and interest rates. In many cases, leasing no longer offers meaningful savings compared to financing, removing yet another option from the affordability toolbox. For consumers who relied on leasing to control costs, this shift further narrows their choices. There's also the question of how electric vehicles fit into this picture. While EVs are often marketed as the future of transportation, EDMUNDS' data data indicates that their higher upfront prices and financing costs can amplify affordability challenges rather than relieve them. Incentives help, but they don't fully offset rising interest rates and elevated base prices. For many buyers, the promise of long-term fuel savings doesn't outweigh the immediate burden of higher monthly payments. As these pressures converge, the car market begins to resemble a system optimized for short-term transactions rather than long-term sustainability. Edmunds' findings suggest that success is increasingly measured by how much consumers can be stretched, not by how well vehicles align with real-world budgets. That shift has profound implications for how the industry evolves, especially if economic conditions tighten further. What makes this moment so critical is that Edmunds' data gives us a rare glimpse into the mechanics behind the headlines. It strips away the optimism and exposes the reality beneath the surface. A market that still moves, still sells, but does so by leaning harder and harder on consumers' willingness to absorb financial stress. And as that stress accumulates, the margin for error continues to shrink, setting the stage for consequences that may arrive faster than many expect. As that margin for error shrinks, even small economic shifts could have outsized effects. A modest rise in unemployment, a tightening of credit standards, or another increase in interest rates could instantly expose how fragile these deals really are. Edmunds' data suggests that many buyers are operating with little financial buffer, meaning the system relies heavily on stability to keep functioning. When a market depends on everything going right, it becomes increasingly vulnerable to anything going wrong. Another dimension revealed by Edmunds is the changing role of incentives and discounts. In previous cycles, automakers could lean on rebates, low-interest financing, and aggressive promotions to restore balance when affordability weakened. Today, those tools are far less effective. High base prices and elevated rates leave little room for meaningful relief, and even substantial incentives barely move the needle on monthly payments. Edmunds' insights show that the traditional levers used to stimulate demand are losing their power. The emotional toll on consumers is also becoming more apparent. Car shopping, once an exciting milestone, has turned into a stressful negotiation dominated by fear of making the wrong financial decision. Edmunds' data reflects not just higher payments, but longer decision times, increased comparison shopping, and growing hesitation. Buyers are no longer confident they're getting a fair deal. They're just hoping to survive the transaction without regret. At the same time, the gap between sticker prices and perceived value continues to widen. Many buyers look at what they're paying and question whether the vehicle truly justifies the cost. Edmunds' data suggests this perception problem is growing, particularly as reliability and quality improvements fail to keep pace with rising prices. When consumers feel that value has eroded, it undermines trust in the entire market.